BC, how are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys?
Good. We're doing well. Let's let's start with the Michigan thing a little bit. I mean, what are your just kind of thoughts as more and more reports about this alleged cheating scandal comes out? Because at first it kind of felt like, okay, maybe this is just sort of maybe a one-off, not kind of isolated incident. And then as more and more
Yeah.
reporting comes out, it seems to be a vast and large conspiracy. I guess just how have you sort of processed all these reports have come out about Michigan?
Yeah, I don't even know if I've seen the latest one or two reports, Ravi, if there's been something this morning or whatever, but
Just the stuff yesterday about the
yeah.
SEC teams and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I know Matt Rhule was answering in general at his press conference about sort of sign stealing and how it happens, within games against the team you're playing, and that's sort of the part of the competition, and that's usual. But he also spoke in general about, it's a different category if someone is, coming into the stadium and it breaking a rule that's written down, and that's the bottom line. And I'm only bringing what he said into it because I liked how he said it, because I kind of nodded my head and I thought this is one of those deals where people will push it to the side and say, oh, it's no big deal. They're a great team anyway, whatever. Are we really going to make a thing about that? Is that what is getting them over the top? But rules are rules. And at some point, I think we need to get back to some of these deals where if you broke the rule, there's an actual punishment for it, because there are actually some people who are abiding by it. And I know there's some people say, well, you're naive. That's not true. I don't think so, because there's a lot of coaches, I think, around the country that are pretty peeved about what Michigan did in this situation. And I think they lost a lot of respect from a lot of peers if these allegations, which there seems to be more and more evidence of, sort of are proven. So I think it's I think there should be a pretty good penalty for it. I'm not saying that's why they're winning games. They're a great team. They would be probably undefeated regardless. But still, it even makes it more mind-boggling why you kind of go to that category of doing something like that when you have the type of team you do already.
Well, BC, we were kind of talking during the break, unsure if they would still be undefeated or if they would carry like one loss at season's end. And, if Michigan didn't go about stealing signs, if this all comes out to be true, is Ohio State where Michigan should be? And is Penn State where Ohio State should be? And would Michigan then fall into that third tier of top Big Ten teams, or would Michigan still be in that second tier? We just really don't know. And I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on that. If you think Michigan would take a drop or would take a loss and be out of the college football playoff, and if they did steal these signs just to get that one win to guarantee them in the college football playoff.
Are you asking if I think they could get penalized? Okay.
I guess I'm really just asking, if Michigan didn't go about doing like the things that they did, would they be the number 2 team in the country, or would Ohio State the past 2 years have taken that spot instead of them?
I mean, that's impossible to know, I guess. I don't doubt that Michigan had a good enough football team that they might have done close to what they did. But the thing is, we don't know that. And in a way, to me, it doesn't matter, because I think it's kind of back to that point. Like, we've got rules, and let's start playing by the rules a little bit around here. There's a lot of leeway right now within college football for a lot of different categories with NIL and stuff like that, where you can make hay and actually be within the guardrails, because no one actually knows where the guardrails are. But in this case, we actually set them on the side of the road and said, hey, you can't do this. You can do this. This does happen, but don't go over here. And it appears they went over there from what we're seeing. We will, let it all play out, I guess. But yeah, I think it's really damning stuff. And the way Robbie asked the first question, I was kind of in that camp when this story started, like, yeah, whatever. I admittedly kind of put my hands in the air about it. And the more and more I read about it, the more kind of annoyed I get with what I think Michigan was doing. And maybe it's a petty thing to some people, but I just go back to like, come on, it's on paper. You don't need to do it. And what I was curious when you're asking that question, Andrew, is what happens like with the committee um, with this team. If they go undefeated, I think they'll be in. But let's say they lose one and there's a big debate, about who's that fourth team, and it's really scattered for that spot. You wonder if they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt now, and I would think they maybe won't.
BC, I'll let your mind deflate from my very complicated question to decipher.
Deflate's a good word for this too.
and ask you maybe something a little simpler here. What do you think is the extent of the punishment? You kind of you alluded to it with that last point, but if there is a lot of truth that comes out about this and they're like, okay, we have to punish this team in some way, shape, or form, what do you think the extent is? Is it as deep as, hey, we're going to strip, whether it's a potential Heisman Trophy from their quarterback, like the Heisman voters are going to do something there, or the college football playoff, things like that, we're going to strip a title, or is the NCAA just going to stay out of that business and just do something like, hey, we're stripping a Big Ten championship?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I mean, that's the thing that's going to be really interesting. I haven't seen if anybody's gotten sourcing on what could happen. I would guess the NCAA doesn't want to get out too far in front of their skis yet, with what might happen. That's why my mind kind of goes to what's in front of us right now over the next month and a half, before that all plays out. And it's not that I think someone's going to intentionally say, this team we put at number 5 that was 11-1 because of this situation. But it just makes me ponder if there's enough animosity about it in the air by the time we get to that final vote. If Michigan does lose one game, I'm just curious if like human nature takes over a little bit there and someone else gets the bump over them. But that's just me speculating. And but this story's going to be out there like every day, every week for the rest of the season. So it's going to be hard for, honestly, Michigan's going to have to really work hard as a football team, the guys on it, to focus around it, and keep playing at the level they are. Maybe they're going to rally around it and do that whole thing where they think everybody's against them for no reason and play really well. That could very well happen. But, it's a messy deal, and it's way more messy than I realized even 6 or 7 days ago.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. Let's switch gears to Nebraska here a little bit. And maybe, I know we talk about the injuries on offense a lot, but it almost feels like we don't fully appreciate how sort of ridiculous it's been. I know several people have asked Coach Rhule and Coach Satterfield, like, hey, have you ever experienced anything like this? Both of their answers were no. Like, do we fully appreciate how absurd the situation on offense has become?
I think most people get it. I'd say since I've been covering this team, I started as a beat writer in 2007, last year of Callahan, and I did it some in college before that. But I've never had one press conference that I was at where we had take the Gabe Ervin Ramir Johnson day first off. That Monday, I've never had one that I remember quite like that, where there's been bad injury news, but not like, oh, it's the top 2 guys on the same day right here at the very position that everybody says this whole operation needs to center around with this offense and running the ball and all that stuff, and they're gone. And so you get that day, and I was like, well, that's pretty rough for a first year for a staff. And then to have that basically happen times 2 now with the O-line, with the Piper Corcoran news, and Nuri's out for a couple weeks at least, nothing like it. I can't compare it. There's been better player. I hate to get into this discussion, but there's been times where like a top level guy was injured that maybe produced a little bit more than some of them, but not like the whole collection where it's like, okay, 2 or 3 guys from this spot at the exact same moment, and sort of when not everyone's expecting it. I think coming out of Saturday, the big discussion was about Ben Scott, because he'd been down on the field, and it ends up like, Corcoran's out, who had finished the game off, and all this stuff. So there was there's been names or two that have popped up where you're like, oh, I didn't even really know that was coming. And honestly, after he delivered the news on Monday, there was like a 5-second just sort of silence. Like people were kind of collecting the thought, like, okay, that I got to process that. Did I hear all the names right? Is it no Ben Scott? Corcoran's one of them. It's just it's been a really strange deal, but I like what Satterfield's approach was, because it's the only way you can do it. Yesterday, he turned it forward and is just like, we got a lot of young guys and they're excited to play, and let's go, and that's all you can do. But yeah, it's been something unbelievable. And I hope people can put it in perspective compared to most years. This is not normal what we've seen.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about the wide receiver room, which, because it didn't happen at the same time, right?
Yeah.
You still lost 2 of your top 3 guys, your top guys out for multiple weeks at least, and then one of your top 4 guys quit before the season started, right? So the wide receiver room might be in the worst shape of all of them, and we're not even talking about that one anymore. The reason I asked that question, though, I guess, is because it seems like, and it's kind of human nature while you're watching a game, but it seems like people are still really critical of how the offense looks, and kind of rightfully so, in that it hasn't looked great. But it's just, how do you balance those two things of like, yeah, the offense doesn't look very good, also no one is healthy that we ever thought was going to play for us?
I think you can find a balance with it by the fact that we don't have to expect them to be a high flying attack, but we should expect them to knock some unforced errors out of the way. There's been some stuff that has been mistake riddled that has nothing to do with some of the injuries. You just got to catch snaps. You've got to have exchanges that are proper. They've just left the ball on the turf too much. And Rhule talked about this on his radio show last night. Interceptions will sometimes happen.
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep throwing the ball some, but he hasn't had a team maybe that's put the ball on the ground as much as this. And they had 3 times that ball was on the ground in the first 35 minutes, and they got them all back. And that's why we're not talking about that as much.
Mm-hmm.
But that's been a real problem since, first game when Anthony fumbled against Minnesota, and then Colorado, obviously, with the drop snaps. It really hasn't gone away. It's always kind of poked its head out. So when I look at the offense, it's like, I know you're limited in what you can do, but let's stop watching that stuff. Like where you have 2 or 3 series like the beginning where Rhule says it was so bad it hurt his lips to even try to make an excuse for it. That's the sort of stuff where they can be better than that, even with the personnel that's on the field. And it'll be interesting Saturday. It's not like the O-line is going to trot out guys who don't have some experience. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but Prohaska's started games. Henry Lutovsky's played a decent amount of football by now. And Justin Evans-Jenkins is a guy they've really liked all year, and they've been trying to work in as sort of the 6th or 7th guy prior to this stuff. So you got to go out there and hope there's not one more guy who falls and is injured there. But if those guys stay healthy, you can work with that front 5 and still run the offense you've been trying to run, and hope to get some stuff done.
BC, speak to how unselfish this team is. Hearing Coach Rhule rave about Ethan Piper regarding the importance of reps for someone taking his position on the field has to be one of the most mature things I've heard in a while. Just the ultimate teammate. How does Piper and the rest of the guys embody the culture of putting others before themselves?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of guys like that over there, which has helped them this first year. Ethan Piper's a special dude, though. I remember when he was a recruit at Norfolk Catholic, he had committed or was going to commit, and I called him, and first off, he had like some musical that he was doing after school or something like that, because he was one of those guys who played in the band and was in musicals and all that, and he's in like, I'll call you back, I promise. I got to go to his Bible study, and so he went to that, and I'm thinking, well, sometimes you don't get the kids that call you back. They forget. He calls back immediately after it. But it was just like, I was thinking that this kid's like got all these things lined up. He's like the all-American boy. And he's always been that since he's been here. And so I'm not shocked he said that. And the context of it, of course, was he thinks it'll be good for that because Justin's going to get those reps now, and it's going to help his development, and that's going to be good for him. And in the long run, it's one more guy in the program who has that under his belt after this season's over. But for him to say that out loud, not something a lot of guys would say in that moment when they're especially that first week when it just hits you so hard with that injury. So that's really cool of him. And I think he's a guy that is going to be very successful. I think he's going to be a teacher and coach after he's done playing, and he'll do very well at it.
BC, I want to switch over to the defensive side of the ball. One of the things that Tony White said yesterday that really stuck out to me was just this idea that, okay, maybe even though we don't love the way the offense looks, they've been a really important part in preparing the defense to look as good as they have. I guess that's not really something I had just kind of thought about before. How did you take that comment from him? I know he was trying to pay compliments to his other units, but it kind of makes sense though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I had asked him a question actually about what he thinks of the young linemen. That's where the question started. Like, what does he think of, like, because he sees them as much as anything because they've been on the scout team and they go against his guys, and like, how has he seen them build up? And he really took that opportunity to drive down that lane. And it's really smart for this team right now, because when Rhule sets a message on Monday, he goes up front and you can tell there's like 3 or 4 things that they're like points he's driving home. And he had one where he said he used his hands and he moved them far away. He's like, we can't be over here. We got to be here. And he put them together, and we got to be Huskers. And he was really, he's made that point a couple times. This has got to be a full team deal where you complement the other side of the ball as much as you can. And there is a part of this too. Some would say the offense isn't capable, and maybe there's some truth to that. But the offense, Marcus Satterfield's not doing exactly what he has dreamed of calling right now with this offense. We have to keep that in mind. I mean, he's working with the personnel he has. He knows that they just really need to not turn the ball over and win field position and set up this defense. And so the fact that the other coordinator, Tony White, like comes back and says, yeah, we're a great rushing defense right now. Not his words, mine, but you got to give a lot of credit to the physical practices that those guys on the other side of the ball have given us all off season. I mean, they've contributed to that defense being the type of tackling team they are and the type of group they are in the trenches. So I like how they're, I feel like there's good unity over there right now. And I don't think it's just words to say. I actually think they have it, and that they're going to need it with what's going on to win 2 or 3 more, and get where they want to be.
BC, for Nebraska to win this game this weekend, they have to do what?
Not turn the ball over more than once. And I mean, you can accept one that gets away or something that happens over the course of 60 minutes. And then I want to see the defense take that next step and, get, when they get pressure, force a fumble, have it be one of those games where someone's picking it up and running it back, or Tommy Hill could have had a pick 6 on like the second or third play of the game Saturday. Make that play. Like, that play's sort of been missing. Isaac Gifford's been a great player all year. I bet if you went back and had a real honest conversation with him, he wishes he could have that one back in Minnesota, in the end zone. So there's all these plays that have been right in front of this defense where they're aggressive. They're in position to be not just guys who stop somebody, but who take the game into their hands literally and take the football away and produce points themselves. I think they're going to have to do that a little bit down the stretch. Iowa's been a specialist in this, where their defense will get a pick 6 or whatever and win a game that way. On Saturday, maybe that's what it is. Maybe you win a game 17-13 and you have a defensive or special teams touchdown that puts you over the top. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's going to be something like that that's needed. And they got to win the turnover battle. They got to win field position. Brian Buschini is going to have to be nails the rest of the way, where when they have a chance to pin someone inside the 5, they do it. All that little stuff is not little stuff. It's the stuff that's going to decide if they win.
BC, we'll get you out of here on this. About a minute left. For the people that don't hate themselves and haven't watched a ton of Purdue football this year, how big of a gap do you think there is, if any, between the Northwestern team that we saw on Saturday and the Purdue team that's coming up here this week? Because I mean, those are two of the bottom teams in the league, and certainly in the West. Just where do you see those teams at compared to each other?
I think Purdue's a little more dangerous on offense, and so the stuff that it's not like I think they're a juggernaut, but the stuff that Nebraska did early on Saturday, if they did the same things, they might have been down like 10 or 14 nothing. And that, Nebraska's defense might have had something to say about that, but it would have been a lot harder to stop this unit. I have respect for Hudson Card. He's been around and he's good with his feet. Deion Burks is a guy who's averaging 6 yards receiving a game, so he's a dangerous weapon. And Maccabee got him pretty good last time these two met. He's a big back who I think started as a walk-on there and has kind of risen up. So I just think their offense is a little better. So Nebraska's offense has to be crisper, and Nebraska's defense they did play great at times, but they're going to have to maybe, knock out an explosive play or two that they allowed this past Saturday. It won't be easy, but they'll have to be dialed in because Purdue has a couple guys where, the play where Omar Brown tracked him down. I don't know if they do that against Purdue. I think that's maybe a touchdown. So that's those kind of plays you can't have holes like that probably this week.
Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. We'll talk to you again next week, B.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, BC.